Hi everyone, welcome back to this video series, how to dissolve the egoic mind. This is part 3 now. In the last video, and I put all the links below, all the videos that you can watch. In the last video series, part 2, we talked about trauma and how the ego gets created from traumatic events in your life. In this video, we're going to dive in a little deeper in terms of the process of the ego and how this works and how you can start seeing this in your life so you can understand things a little better when it comes to the egoic mind. So the process of the ego is this. Think about when you're in a traumatic event when you're younger, like could be a child again, like we said before, anytime. When you're in a trauma event, the ego comes in and it attaches itself to the mind. The ego comes in because it believes you are in survival and fear in these moments, and it attaches itself to the mind. It does not have access to the body. It's important to know that. The ego does not have access to your body, so the rest of the body, but it only has access to the mind. So it comes in and it identifies with the mind and it completely attaches itself to the mind now. And then what happens is that the mind just continues in this pattern because the mind is like a wandering mind and it wants to kind of think about things. It wants to like do its own thing. The mind is actually quite innocent, but it continues because it's wandering. It's really interested. It's curious. It's like the wind. It goes in and out. So it continues with the cycle. So when the ego comes in and says, oh my gosh, you're in fear and survival, the mind, because it's a wandering mind, goes, oh, am I in fear and survival? Oh, let's go a little bit deeper. Let's go in a little bit more so I can understand this a bit better. And that's when it gets stuck. And that's when the belief systems come in. And that's when the reenactment of the thoughts too much. If you think about a really good example would be psychosis. Psychosis is a really good example of this. When psychosis happens, I have put a video out there about psychosis, so I put a link below, but when psychosis happens, it's an overacting, basically the mind takes over the body. It's another way of saying it. So this is a really good example of psychosis. The ego comes in, think about psychotic episode. The ego comes in, believes you're in fear and survival, and now the mind believes you're in fear and survival. In psychosis, that continues. It's like it's constant. I must be in fear of survival all the time. And you stay up in the mind the whole time. And now it's taken over your body, right? Okay, so let's go back to this trauma event. So this trauma event comes in, the ego then comes in, acting as a protective mechanism for you, and it attaches itself to the mind. It doesn't have access to the body, but it goes to the mind straight away, identifies with the mind strongly, and the mind is wondering, and it's like, oh, okay, I listen to this. At the same time, the soul body leaves. So when the trauma event happens in your life, the mind comes in, attaches to the mind, but the soul body leaves at that time. Why does the soul body leave? It's because in this protective mechanism that you're in through this, I guess you could say the ego, that this is its role, right? It's actually protecting your soul. That's actually what is going on. Your soul has to leave at that time. So the soul body leaves, but the ego comes in and attaches itself to the mind. So this is how the process works. The mind believes that it is the ego in a way. The egoic mind believes it's meant to be with the mind. It's meant to be identified with the mind. And actually, it doesn't really know anything else. The ego, again, only knows fear and survival. It's like when there are changes in your life, usually, people go with the changes. There's a growth that happens. Ego can't do that yet. And the reason why ego can't do that is because it doesn't know that you are actually safe. But this is the magic. This is the power that we have. We have the power to train ourselves to make the ego know and the mind know that you are actually safe. That's what's going on. And this is what we're going to be learning more and more in this course. So how can you start teaching your mind, ego, to know that you are safe? Because once it knows you're safe, it will let you go. It's fine. It'll go back and go, oh, okay, you're safe. That's great. I'm so glad to know that you're all protected. It's not an issue. I'm going to go now, right? It will let you go. It really will. But if it believes you're in fear and survival, it's going to find it hard to let go. Now, we talked about in the previous video trauma, right? So let's go back to this process that happens. So remember, you're in this traumatic event, let's say when you're a child, the ego comes in, attaches itself to the body, the soul body leaves. And then what happens now is that, like I said before in the previous video, this pattern gets created in this trauma body now you're in. So as you're going through your life, like we said in the previous video, you're now in this pattern and you're in this trauma body response, right? So now the trauma body responses come out from this process that's just happened because the ego is identified with the mind. So the trauma body responses could be shouting, overthinking. Maybe you're one of those people that you feel quite attacked easily. Whatever we talked about before, whatever you're triggered by, what response comes from that? What unconscious response comes from that is your trauma body being played out. So that's the whole process. Now, what I want you to do is ask yourself this question. Can you start noticing how your mind gets entangled with your egoic thoughts? I'm going to say that again. How does your mind get entangled with your egoic thoughts? Remember, we were just talking about this. So the process being the ego comes in and attaches to the mind. The mind is wandering, so it's going to go into that way of thinking. And now it's built a belief system that these stories must be true, right? It really believes the stories now because the natural mind is wandering and the ego goes fear and survival. So the mind goes, oh my gosh, I must be in fear and survival. So now the body believes it's in fear and survival because the mind is connected to the body. So now it puts the body in the fear and survival, which is the unconscious behaviors that come out in the trauma body, the shouting, escaping things, overthinking, or whatever the trauma body is, whatever responses that you have. That's the unconscious behaviors because the mind is connected to the body. So the mind sends signals to the body and makes it believe that. And now you have got these unconscious responses in this trauma body that happens. So ask yourself that question. Can you start noticing this in your life? Can you start noticing how your mind is getting entangled with these egoic thoughts? And if you haven't already thought about this, but also the unconscious behavior. So when the mind gets attached by the ego, are you noticing how your unconscious behaviors are playing out in your life as well? How is this impacting your life? How is this mind ego impacting your life? How can you see it in your life? Are you noticing the overthinking? Are you noticing the belief systems? Remember, we talked about the mind, wandering mind. It really now builds a belief system because the ego comes in, believes you're in fear and survival. Are you noticing that's what's happening with your mind? Start taking notice of that. And remember, we talked about not judging yourself. So when you notice these things, you don't need to put any judgment on yourself. Just sit back, relax, and just start, I like to use the words, that's interesting, I'm noticing that. That's interesting, just observing without judgment. That's interesting that I'm noticing this. And start really becoming more conscious of what you're allowing your mind to believe. And this is the whole thing that we're going to be talking about. What are you allowing your mind to believe that it really believes you are in fear and survival? Because if that continues, then your body is going to keep believing it's in fear and survival. And that's the way you're just going to carry on with your life. So in the next video, we're going to cover the feeding of the ego. So how are you letting your egoic mind being fed in this fear and survival and therefore reenacting these old patterns like we talked about? And then further on from that, we're going to talk about how you can start deleting the ego in your life.